Okay, it's time to move on to three-dimensional form. And the first thing that I want you guys to do is to blur your vision and identify your whitest white and your darkest darks. So take a look at your reference and blur your vision. Tell me, what is the darkest area? Immediately when you blur your vision, you should notice that the darkest area is right here. Right. Now in person, this area is probably as dark as this, but you have to remember that when something dark is placed next to something light, it makes it look darker and it makes that light area look lighter. Now, if this value is matching this value, this one still appears darker because this one is next to something that's also dark. So it doesn't stand out as much. Now you're going to have to draw all three of these objects on one paper. It's important to notice that this is the darkest dark because 10 should only be reserved for this area. This area and perhaps this area and maybe a little bit of the shadow under here. When you start shading the cube, for instance, nothing should be a 10. Let me bring out the value scale just to remind you. So here we have our value scale. And you ask yourself, well, if we're doing the top of the cube, what value is that? Well, probably a value of 1. This is a value of 1. Let me come back into focus. Well, actually, no. I'll stay out of focus just so you can see. When it comes to the face of the cube, what value is that? Or what comes closest? Probably a value of 2. Maybe 3 in person. So on camera, things look a little bit different. You have to judge for yourself. And when it comes to the shadow, I'd say perhaps a value of 4 or so. And as you move along, you'll have to match the values appropriately. You don't need the value scale though, because when you blur your vision, yours should look like, the reference. I know that some of you might be intimidated by this assignment, but there's nothing to be intimidated about because everything that you need to know, you already know. What you're learning now is value application. So you already know about shapes, you already know about following the line, you already know your measurement techniques. So the first thing you should do, and what I want you to do, is really measure this and try to get it more or less the same size. So I'm going to use the sight size measuring technique just because it's a little bit faster. Then pay attention to the direction that the lines are going in. Also remember, absolutely no heavy dark outlines, okay? No heavy dark outlines. These lines are going slightly up. With a cube, remember that 3 lines are parallel. This line, and this line. This line, and this line, and this line, and this line, and this line. So the cube is made out of 9 lines in total. I have to stand up to make sure that it's not out of proportion. So I'm just going to draw the cube quickly. So what's most important here is not that the cube is drawn correctly, it's just that the value is correct. Excuse me. I'm trying to be a little bit dark on the camera so you can see it, but the truth is that when you guys draw, you shouldn't be that dark. I want to gauge more or less where this side falls. So we're breaking it down into lines and shapes. That's the first thing we're doing here. Another thing that often gets overlooked by students is to draw out the shape of the shadow. So draw out the shape of the shadow. Where does the shadow start? Well, it starts right here, right? Sometimes students will do it right at the corner. No, that's not where it starts. Draw out the shape of the shadow. Make sure it's not extended too much. You could measure it out if you need to. And then where does it end? It does end here, at this corner. And surely something is off because this and this are not the same. So let me extend this a little bit more. Okay, and once your cube is outlined very lightly, I remind you, the cube is very easy. So there's no blending required. You literally take the value and you plug it in. So if we said that the top is a value of 1, well, first of all, I'm going to make sure, now I have to go back because I did the line so you could see it, but I want to make sure that that line, the value of the line itself isn't imposing. And we're just going to shade this to be a value of 1. In order to gauge if you're correct, refer to the how to know if your value is correct video, blur your vision, and make sure it matches up. Very easy, light value right there at the top. I want to lighten it a little bit more. I feel like it's a little dark, but that could also be because everything isn't in place yet. But from my experience, I know that I at least want to kind of spread it around. So I'm going to get a little tissue and just spread that around a bit. And that's going to lighten it and it's going to even the tone. And then you could get an eraser and just clean up your edges. So I'd clean up here and here. One thing that's important is if you're smudging with your fingers, be aware that sometimes there's oil in your finger and that smudge, won't come out if it's mixed with oil. Okay, now the next value is this one. So this is a value of either 3 or 2. Blur your vision. Make sure that those values are matching up. Right there along the edge, I think it's a little bit stronger value, but that's not a line, right? Don't think of it as a line, think of it as a value. And make sure that that whole side has the same value. You'll see that whatever lines I was using, they disappear because the value inside the object matches the value of the line. It's also important to know that you won't really know if you're completely correct until everything is done. Once everything is done, then you can compare and make sure that everything is the right value compared to everything else. So one thing on its own, like I said with the first bit, won't tell you if it's correct or not. Again, simultaneous contrast. So maybe this looks, it doesn't, but maybe it looks just right, but when you put this next to it and it's darker, then it might feel too light, for example. So then you have to adjust it, you know. I do feel like my top isn't light enough. So I'm gonna go in and I'm just gonna raise it a little bit, raise a little bit of that graphite by hatching and cross hatching right there at the top. Or just hatching in this case since it's so light. Yeah, that feels, I don't know if you can see it on camera, but it feels a little bit better for me. If you blur your vision, you'll see that it's starting to match up. But I think maybe it needs like one more layer. One very thin layer. Okay, so we finished kind of applying that value, and I feel pretty confident about that. It's still missing a little bit because right underneath it there's a much darker value right here, and I'm gonna go in there and I'm just gonna go ahead and apply that darker value. But you want to make sure that that darker value isn't super dark, okay? So just a lightly, you know, slightly darker value to show that there's a shadow underneath the box. And any, you know, any little excess that you have, because you may have gone over, just take the eraser and clean it up like that. Clean it up. And you'll see that you can start to see the cube come together, but there's no line. There's no line defining the cube or obviously outlining the cube to show you where it is. You can see the cube because of the different values. Now, I'm gonna go ahead and apply this side, which is considerably darker than both of these, and then the shadow is the darkest. For those of you that can't blur your vision, let me help you out. And now let me darken this side. Remember, we darken by applying pressure, hatching, and cross hatching. When you hatch, remember to lift the pencil, blur your vision, check if it's matching. It's better to go lighter at first and darken later than to darken right away, because it's much easier to darken something than it is to lighten something, right? So if you want to darken it, you could just apply more pressure or hatch or cross hatch. You have to apply more graphite. Like, we know what to do. If you want to lighten something, lifting the graphite is a bit tougher. They have kneaded erasers which are specifically for lifting light amount of graphite. You know, then you start getting into the specialty erasers and things like that, and it's just, honestly, it's easier to start light and then darken if you need to. So I know this currently is not dark enough because I'm blurring my vision, but I'm just going to complete that value, and then I'll go in and add another layer, and depending, I'll adjust my pressure to make sure that it starts matching a bit more. Hold the pencil from the back So if you hold the pencil from the back, it lets you cover a wider area. And again, just remember to lift the pencil. So I've created a value here by making a line, but I'm going to make that line go away by making sure that the value inside the cube matches it. So this is form, and we're going to do one more form assignment just to push this to the edge, because it is important to, after this, we're going to do gestural studies, and then we're going to do another form assignment, because this is really important. Okay, so that's the first layer, blurry vision. It's not dark enough. So I gotta make it darker. So I'm gonna go ahead and add another layer, cross hatching now, but I'm also gonna apply a bit more pressure. And that's starting to be it, I think that's starting to match up with the reference. And at this point, it'll really start to look a bit three-dimensional. It can't look completely three-dimensional because there's no back to it. But if there was another value behind it, it would look even better. Blurry vision. Make sure it's matching up. And last but not least, we have to do, well, let's blur our vision quickly. And I think it's this area here looks a little bit lighter, so I'm gonna go in and just darken that a bit. And compare. And I feel confident with that, so I'm moving on to the shadow. Shadow is obviously the darkest thing that the cube has. So we need to apply considerable pressure, but we don't want to reach a value of 10. Remember that we're saving it for this. But we do want to make sure that it is darker than the other sides of the cube. So right here under, you see that there is a very dark line, even darker than the shadow for the most part. And now applying some pressure, I'm going to try and and you can see that my shadow isn't high enough. It isn't riding high enough on the cube. That's probably why it doesn't feel the same. So here it's that high, and here it's that high. So it needs to be up here, coming down like this. Okay, and now I can start to darken this here. You have to make sure you sharpen your pencil, so I'm doing this all the way through. My pencil, I sharpened it with a razor blade, but even now it's starting to dull on me. So when I move on to the cone and the sphere, I'm gonna take a little break in between and make sure that the pencil is sharp. I'm going to blur my vision. I think that's the right value. Remember to lift your pencil to make sure that these shadows are uniform. Shadows shouldn't be too sharp, the edges, so take a little eraser to that, make it feel a little bit softer. And still, the line underneath here has to be considerably darker, so I am just going to take my pencil and apply a little bit more pressure. Okay, so I feel like the shadow is there. I did take my pencil and apply a little bit more pressure underneath. And I'm going to make it a little bit darker underneath over here as well. And And that's the cube. And it's a really nice feeling when, you know, somebody looks at it quickly and they don't know which is which, like which is the reference, which is the paper. Mine is a little different, but I think at a quick glance, you might have a hard time. And that's always a nice feeling. That means like you nailed it, you know. And if you blur your vision, they feel the same. Oh, this actually has to be, these both have to be a bit darker. So I'm just gonna give them one more layer. Darken it a bit. And then this one may be not as hard. Feels a bit more like it. It's close enough. The camera throws it off a bit, and of course this is ink, but you'll see it better in person. Okay, now I'm going to take a little break. I'm going to sharpen my pencil. I'm going to come back. I'm going to continue on the cone. The cone might be a little bit tough because I am going to try to push this to a value of 10, and there may be a lot of reflection, a lot of the graphite reflecting, so it might not be so easy to capture on camera. If I was working upright, it would look a lot better. So I do recommend you work upright. Okay, I've sharpened my pencil, and now it's time to move on to the cone. I'm going to try it the same way, just the sight size method. Oop, I don't know what happened here. My shadow escaped. So let's say maybe from there. Again, no dark lines. Repeat that, no dark lines. You can measure the base. And again, not that the cone has to be perfect, you know. What we're trying to learn here is value. Now here you have to train your vision, because if you look at this side of the cone, there's a line. And very few students ever notice that that line is not connecting. For the purposes of starting the cone, okay, connect it, but when you finish it, you have to make sure that those lines are not connecting. Okay? So draw it out the way that I've taught you. Pay attention to the direction of line. Let me see how far out this shadow goes. Go right to the edge for us. Sorry, doing a little touch-up work there. Where does the shadow start? You know? It's right underneath. All right, and when you're using the same eraser over and over, just if you have another one, switch it up, because it gets dirty, it gets full of graphite. Now here, no need to be shy. You can get right into it and go ahead and start making the 10. All right. All of this is going to be a very dark value of 10. This is going to be very dark value. If you blur your vision, this does seem to glow a bit though, so you are trying to achieve that when you draw your own. You want it to be dark, but you also want it to have that little glow. So let's go ahead and start. I'm just gonna start right away putting lots of pressure. And I'm sorry if the glare is too strong when this is done. But I have to do it until I figure out how to film on an easel. So I'm applying a lot of pressure and I'm making sure I add lots of layers of graphite. But then, you know, that only goes so far. So you are going to have to do some blending here. So right in between, remember, in those little short strokes, hatch and cross hatch in those little areas there. I'm going to create a very light line with a value of 1 just to show me where the shadow is going to extend to, maybe a value of 2. And then I'm going to push that shadow down. Now this does have a little bit of lines going this way. If you want to replicate those lines, you can. So whoever did this when they were hatching, cross hatching, they just left a lot more space, you know, in their hatch marks. Can you do that? Yeah, you can do that. You can leave a little bit more space. Do you have to? No. I'm not a big fan of leaving too much space between my hatch marks. So I don't think I will here either. And I'm gonna measure out like where, I'm gonna blur my vision. So I'm gonna blur my vision and I'm gonna measure out like where that dark shadow extends to. So I know how far to take it. And it extends to about here. But right at the bottom of the cone there's a little bit of light. And then the actual shadow of the cone is extremely dark again. So I'm just going to go right in there and darken that. Now that little light area may be too light. Let me see. I don't know if I can zoom in a bit more here. Get a better look. Unfortunately now you can't really see the cone too much, but there you go. I'm going to be applying a lot of pressure. I don't want to ruin the drawing underneath. So the little light that I was talking about is this right here, and you'll be able to see it better in person. So I left a little gap there to represent that light. And I am pushing down very hard here. And you'll see that that little glow, if you blur your vision, it even extends to here. The way that you make something glow is by contrast of light and dark. And that's really all it is. I mean, you have like a soft light next to a very dark, it'll look like it's glowing. And as I extend this a bit further out, I'm going to start easing up on the pressure. But not here. Here I want it to be dark. When you have a very thin light area like that, it's better leave it white right in the beginning. Because to have to go back in there with an eraser or something is very challenging. Of course, they have, like I said before, they have specialty erasers that are smaller and all this stuff, but that's the hard way to do it. And just right now, leave a little light area. And I'm going to go ahead and extend my shadow further up. And right here. Now blur your vision. Clearly this is too bright compared to this. So we still have a lot of work to do. I don't want to push it to the edge because, like I said, for some reason this edge is a little bit lighter, and it does contrast nicely with the shadow. Blur your vision constantly. See, there's a little light area here. Blur your vision and you can see that. Yeah, so this whole little area that I left blank, that's where the little glow happens on the reference. It's too difficult to see. There you can see it a little bit. So that area, you definitely want it to be dark, but not quite as dark as everything else. So right now, particularly for everything else, not for everything, but in the areas that I think are particularly darker, I'm just gonna hatch and cross hatch and add more pressure. So I want it to be darker there. Now that little light area, I'm just going to shade it in lightly because it's not a value of 0. And I'm going to push this down a bit. And I'm going to darken all of this considerably. And when you're shading, just shade right into the other thing. Don't create a halo, like don't just stop shading randomly. And I'm going to ease up on the value here to blend it a bit with the lighter area. And I might have to erase a bit. We'll see in a second. Now that glow that I was talking about, I'm going to darken all of this, but it's not going to be as dark as the surrounding area to give it that little, but this has to blend into it. So right around there, do like your little circle marks. The shadow is quite sharp here. And I'm starting to like how this looks. We're getting a bit of glare. There you go. As I lift it up, you can see it much better. And I'll try to do that. So I can't draw like that, but that gives you an idea of how it actually looks. It looks great. Like I said, there's a very thin line here that's got actually quite a deep value. That line is not solid, so focus your vision and notice that it's not solid, so don't make it solid. And then there actually is no corner over here, believe it or not. It's just the illusion of a corner and a very dark value that goes up to what your mind paints. Sorry, the camera shut off on me, so I don't know where it shut off. Like I was saying, there isn't a corner here, so just be very attentive, like fine tune your vision, and this line doesn't connect. So I'm actually pretty happy with this. I feel like this is all a value of 0. It shouldn't be, really. We could probably add a very light value, maybe a 0.5. but the truth is it's a value of 0. And it ends up looking like that. And that gives you the little glow that the reference has as well. You can see it there. You can see it better there. So that one is good, and we're just about done with the cone. And we're gonna move on to the sphere. Make sure that there is no extra graphite on the sphere. That might throw me off. Okay, the sphere will be next. Okay, so now we're moving on to the sphere. The process is similar to the others as far as beginning. That's just transparent paper. You could use the site size method. What's most important here is not the sphere, but the value of the sphere. And the sphere is different, maybe the most challenging, because it has some transitions that you have to blend carefully. So if you gauge the height of the sphere and the width of the sphere, that'll let you be pretty accurate. Let me make sure I'm on camera. So this is the height, this is the width, and then you have to, you know, do your thing. Curve it to connect it. You're not gonna make a perfect circle, so don't even try. Just draw, like I showed you how to make lines in pieces, and you're gonna produce something that's acceptable. Still on camera, I believe I am. This is tricky within itself. You want to get a nice circle. But don't worry about it being perfect, because it's not going to be. Okay, once you have your circle, draw your shadow, draw the shape for your shadow as well. Let me go ahead and cover. By the way, when you're drawing, just put a paper over your hand to make sure that your hand doesn't get full of graphite and mess everything up. I'm gonna put a paper over right now just to make sure that it's not transparent coming through. Okay, we can go ahead and measure out this shadow. So I'm gonna measure the shadow, and I'm gonna bring that over. And then you have to judge, where does the shadow start compared to? Somewhere around there. The shadow, it has its own, you know, like it doesn't have a line, but it has it, like it behaves like a line. Like this curves up, comes down, curves back. So you have to be mindful of that. And the shadow for the sphere, because it's a round object, it also dissipates. Kind of like the cone got a little bit lighter there. Well, the sphere is going to do something similar. Let me back out. I'm too zoomed in here. There, that's a bit better. So you can start wherever you want. You start a light area or a dark area. This paper is a bit transparent. So I think I'm just going to get another one and put it under here, and I'll be right back. Okay, that's better. I'm gonna start with the dark areas. For no particular reason. It does help to work from dark to light when you paint, and maybe that's why I prefer starting from the dark areas. When you draw, is it the same? Yeah, I guess it is. It's better if you start from dark to light. But you got to make sure when you draw that you leave your light areas the color of, or the value of the paper, so you don't darken them too much, because we know that white color pencils really aren't effective. And again, this is all about value, light and dark. A very light line, the value as light as I can get it. I'm just gonna go ahead and designate an area where the value is gonna mostly exist on the sphere. And of course you have to blur your vision. The sphere we're definitely gonna erase a bit, and we are going to use let me just stand up and make sure. If it looks a little bit oval now, but that's okay, because I'll clean it up when I erase. Like, I'll erase a chunk and make it look more round. We may use a tissue just to help us spread the value around a bit more. Or a sheet of napkin or something. I have some tissues in class. Hopefully, I don't know if I have enough. I probably don't have enough for everyone, but for some of you, it's not necessary, but it makes it a bit easier. Now, for the value of a sphere, there's also something called bounce light. So presumably, light would be hitting the table and it would bounce back into the sphere. So you see this little area here? That's actually lighter than the shadow below it and the shadow above it. If you're having a hard time seeing it, well, I think it's better if we just keep our vision focused. It's pretty obvious that it's there. You want to make sure you include it in your drawing. And I'm just going to do this one a little bit different. Like, I'm going to start adding layers instead of just jumping right to it. So for the shadows, let me just start with a light layer, and I'll start darkening it as I go, just to be different. Never mind, I changed my mind. I'm just gonna try. I think it takes longer if you do it that way. I'm just getting, I've been drawing for a little while now, a little bit too long. I need a little bit of a break. You guys will have probably 2 classes for this. I think is a fair amount of time, especially since you have the video that you can just, follow along with. This right here is definitely a very dark value. I still don't think I'm dark enough, so. And then this dissipates, so here it's darker and here, and then right here it's a bit lighter. So we're gonna make sure that ours is the same. So here and here and here, it's all gonna be darker. And then here it's still dark, it's just not as dark. I hope I don't get too much glare here. So while I'm doing it, you guys can see how it's coming along. If I do get a lot of glare, what I'm gonna have to do is I'm just gonna have to turn it like I did with the cone, so you could get a better look. So this area here is where you definitely want to start blending, making sure that it slowly starts to get to a lighter value. Remember that you blend by hatching and cross hatching between two values, varying the pressure that you apply with each pencil strokes, slowly getting lighter and lighter. Just take a quick look at the blending video to get a clearer understanding of what I mean by that. Definitely this is much softer around the edges, but I'm gonna wait till the end to soften this here. And I'll show you how to do that. I think the easiest way right now is probably just with a tissue. I could just, you know, start scattering it like that by hatching and cross hatching. And that's gonna soften that edge, meaning it's not sharp. Like the cone was sharp, but since this is round, it shouldn't be sharp. Or just going right along the edge and kind of in an oval stroke, just softening that edge, kind of giving it, you know, a little bit of extra graphite on either side of it. This is coming along. This is still too light here, so you can see it's still way too light, but it's coming along. Blended pretty nicely. I think it's starting to blend pretty nicely, and I'm slowly getting there. I still think it's too bright. Like if you blur your vision, you'll see it's too bright, so it still has to be darkened a bit. So one way to darken that outer edge is the way that I just talked about, just going right along the edge and adding a little bit. The other way, and again, you have to be careful when you use any of these types of tools, is just get a little, you know, tortillon or a little tissue, little napkin, and just go right along that edge. And we're definitely going to do that here in a second, just because you'll see it's going to help us quite a bit, you know, make it happen. But before that, I want to make sure that the value inside, because the value inside right here in the middle, this has like 3 values, maybe even more. It has a very light value here, a very dark value here, and then it lightens up slightly and then kind of dark again. It's a round object, and that's why this is happening. Like, this is when you have something round, there's no edges, so the light moves around it. So I'm just going to start with the dark value. Now, right on top of that, there's a much lighter value. So I'm gonna add that lighter value. But these are blended, pretty extreme blending here. So right along the edge here, I'm gonna make sure I completely break up like any remnants of the very dark value. I don't want a line, I want it to look like a smooth transition. So you go right up along the edge where the two values meet, and you just kind of, you know, either hatch and cross hatch or do the circular motion. And that should definitely help it blend. Another thing that you can do, which I just described, is first of all add the value. Right? You don't want to push the dark value out there. So what I did, I added the value, and I'm going to show you guys what to do with the tissue right now. You have to add the value, and whenever you do this, you have to make sure that you go back and that you erase, like, because sometimes, or all of the time, you get graphite where you don't expect it, even though it's very like light and you might not notice it. And that's a quick and easy way to kind of extend that value. And it blends it a little bit, but since these two values are so extreme, you're still gonna have to go in, and like I said before, you're just gonna have to hatch and cross hatch to make sure that the values blend into each other, or in a circular motion, but you want to break up any lines that might be forming between these two values so it blends properly. And like I said before, you're going to have to, if you do that, you're going to have to erase, because the value always goes out further than you expect, but it is a very nice effect. For those of you who decide to do that a lot, there is something called fixative, which when you're done with your drawing, you spray it and it's like it holds it in place, so the graphite can't go anywhere. So I'm just going to continue to blend this here, again by hatching and cross hatching right along the edge at varying pressures. So I'm not applying a lot of pressure. I'm just trying to make sure that line is broken up, and I think I'm doing a pretty good job of making sure that line is broken up and those two values are blending. Yeah, so now the last thing left to add is this, which should be dark, but not as dark as this. You might hear a ping in a second because I'm uploading one of the other videos right now, so if you hear that, that's what that is. For this, you do want to make sure that it's crisp here, right? So the actual sphere can be crisp. The shadow doesn't have to be crisp. So I'm gonna take my eraser and I'm just gonna make sure that I erase this. You want that to be nice and crisp. Yeah, so almost finishing up here. Remember that there is a little bit of bounce light right there. And I'm gonna just change this a bit to make the sphere look more round. You know, if this is a value of 10, then right next to it is probably a value of 8. Just because there is a little bit of bounce light in there, don't get that mistaken for a light value. That's a very dark value. Just not as dark as what's next to it. There's that other video that's done loading. You do want to make sure that this blends as well, like we did to the other side. And you want to make sure that the shadow is dark enough. And I think it is dark enough on video. I'm just going to darken it a bit more because you do have to be able to differentiate between the shadow and the sphere. And that contrast of darkness and a bit lighter here is what creates that bounce light or that glow. This sphere has a bit of an outline here. And let me just tilt it because I already see that I'm getting lots of glare on camera. So if I turn it, you can start seeing it more accurately. It's still a bit too light. So I'm going to darken it just a little bit more. And I'm going to darken in the sphere a bit more, as I think it should be. And I know at this point I got a lot of glare from the graphite, but I'm almost done. And I think that's it. That's it for the sphere. Make sure that you have your highlight. I would actually even just dissipate this line a bit more. You have your sphere, your cone, and your cube.